welcome to Political Capital. I'm Karabule Tlhatla. We're coming to you from Durban South Beach, a stone's throw away from Africa's trial of the century. It's been 9 years in waiting, but when it finally came, the day did not disappoint. Thousands came out to support President Zuma as he goes through what could be possibly the biggest trial of his political life. Over the course of the show, we will be showing you that court case as it happened and what Durbanites and people from around the country make of President Jacob Zuma's predicament. But first, let's start with the newspapers.
Scores of newspapers from around the world covered the Zuma court case, including the Financial Times in London. Many of his supporters ignored a call by the ANC not to wear party regalia outside court. The ANC is officially not backing Mr. Zuma over the case, but the former Liberation Movement remains divided between backers of Mr. Ramaphosa and acolytes of the former president, many of whom retain senior party posts and seats in cabinet. South African bishops say Zuma's court appearance good for democracy. So says Crux, the Catholic newspaper. So even though there is a tradition of explicitly or implicitly covering up for the wrongdoings of people with political or corporate clout, the willingness to take former President Zuma to court is an important public step against an encroaching culture of impunity. So says Father Peter John Pearson, the director of the Southern African Catholic Bishops. Jacob Zuma resumes Stalingrad bid to fend off prosecution, so says the Business Day. Former President Jacob Zuma appears to be going ahead with a Stalingrad defense of deploying every possible legal device to stop his prosecution proceeding as he faces 16 charges of corruption, fraud, racketeering and money laundering. It is understood that if his application to review the decision to prosecute him fails, he will then approach the courts in a bid to get a permanent stay of prosecution. And finally, a little barb from Justice Malala. What exactly is Zuma up to in the Port Elizabeth Herald? For a man who's always portrayed himself as a servant of the ANC, Zuma seems to be preparing to destroy the very organisation he professes to love. Worse, he seems to be prepared to push the country he once led back into the violence of the late 1980s and early 1990s in KwaZulu-Natal. A sobering thought indeed.
On April 6, 2008, Mkotedi Mshe, then the head of the NPA, announced his decision to drop the corruption charges against President Jacob Zuma. 10 years later, on the same date, he stands trial on the very same charges of corruption, racketeering, money laundering, and fraud. It's been 24 hours to remember. Here's the highlights.
This matter is adjourned to the 8th of June 2018, which is a provisional date, and the two accused before court, having been summoned to appear before this court, are released on bail. Sorry, are released on warning, rather.
Outside the court, the call to keep politics out of this trial appeared to fall on deaf ears. President Zuma spent 20 minutes in court and twice as long turning this into something akin to a political rally.
I am being accused of buying arms. Those arms were bought when I was an MEC in KwaZulu-Natal. It was probably my spirit that bought the arms. I'm not going to say a lot. It's in the court of law now. My name has been dragged in the mud. When they talk about my name, they do not say that these are allegations about Jacob Zuma, but they mumble. It is said that people are no longer given a hiding. I could have beaten a countable number of people. I am warning them. What I am trying to say is that it has dawned. It is much clearer that people who are in charge of the law and politics know that individuals have rights. Unfortunately, I don't have.
It had been a hard day's night. On the eve of the trial, Zuma supporters gathered for an all-night vigil for him in Durban's Albert Park.
All the people supporting President Zuma are here to express their solidarity. You know, people are traveling also from different parts of the country, and they will arrive here. And also tonight we will be explaining exactly why President Zuma is being persecuted.
There are allegations, there is a charge sheet, there will be a trial. I live in a country where there's constitutional democracy, where the Constitution says that every South African is innocent until proven guilty or found guilty by a court of law.
Hours later, Zuma made his way into court for the briefest of appearances that drew this reaction from the National Prosecuting Authority.
That is why it's a provisional date. It's in anticipation of the processes that will ensue. If the application for review is not finalized, as well as the representation by then, it would be necessary to reconsider the date.
The next court appearance will be here in Durban on June the 8th. Chris Bishop, CNBC Africa.
Meanwhile, the political bloodletting continued in South Africa's capital city. The Democratic Alliance held its 7th Federal Congress in the city of Tshwane amid challenges from within and without the party. Following fierce and marathon debates, the party adopted diversity as its 4th value pillar. That means diverse races, gender, and sexual orientation. This was the backdrop for the struggle for leadership. The 37-year-old leader of the opposition, Mmusi Maimane, and the chair of the federal executive, James Self, stood unopposed for their respective positions. The NAB was the party's second most important position, currently held by Nelson Mandela Bay Mayor Athol Trollip, who was being challenged by Member of Parliament Annelie Lotriet and the Mayor of the host city, Solly Msimanga.
And I want to say there have been a number of changes. There were a number of policies that were adopted. There were a number of amendments to the Constitution that were brought forward. And I think as leader of this movement, I certainly have a great privilege of being able to ensure that this has probably been the most diverse, the biggest Congress that we've ever had in the party's history, with well over 2,000 delegates that came through. And I think one of the healthiest things about the DA is that we contest for ideas, but people want to think that people contest, just because they contest each other does not mean when they walk out they are sworn enemies. I want to say to all the people that contested ideas, it's good to contest ideas, it's good to contest, but ultimately when we move on, whatever Congress has resolved, that's what takes us forward.
South Africa's official opposition party had 3 other positions up for contestation to complete its top 6 leadership posts. And following hours of voting by over 2,000 delegates, this is how the cookie crumbled. Nelson Mandela Bay Mayor Athol Trollip was re-elected as the party's federal chair, and completing the top 6 positions was Ivan Meyer, Mike Waters and Refilwe Ntseke. But where were the women?
I think the criticism is quite unfounded, actually. I think some of the strongest people in the Democratic Alliance are women, and many of them are black women. I take, for example, my colleague Phumzile Vandama, who single-handedly made sure that Bell Pottinger fell. She's an amazing asset and an inspiration to many South Africans. I think what this Congress has done is it's illustrated to South Africa just how diverse we are. The 2019 election will certainly be one that's based a lot on race, and I think that that's quite unfortunate, because in our country you cannot say that I, Natasha Mazzoni, as a white woman, don't represent you, because I certainly do. I represent all South Africans when I stand up in Parliament.
The opposition has been at war with itself. The protracted fight between the Democratic Alliance and its embattled mayor of Cape Town, Patricia de Lille, saw de Lille survive a motion of no confidence brought against her by her own party. This failure continues to cause consternation within the party and drove them to adopt a recall clause, or as they're calling it, the Patricia clause.
The one thing that we do know is that that clause cannot be used retroactively. So there would have to be circumstances that were justifiable to bring another vote of no confidence in the Cape Town mayor. And if that passed, then that would trigger that particular clause in the Constitution. So it might make it easier to deal with this particular case.
Following the early departure of DA parliamentary leader Lindiwe Mazibuko and the attacks against Cape Town Mayor Patricia de Lille have caused many to ask the question whether a black woman can lead the DA.
In both cases that you cited, the individuals concerned had either conducted themselves in a way that put the party into disrepute, or alternatively were leaving for other reasons. So Lindiwe Mazibuko went to the United States to fulfill a university course.
And some say that was because she didn't see her place in this party.
Well, some say that, others say that she was just going on this to America to go on a course.
But land will be a big factor come the 2019 national elections, and the DA has resolved to fight to protect the property clause in the Constitution. A tough fight against the African National Congress and the economic freedom fighters who are playing it to the max.
Well, I think the one thing that the DA can promise is that we will deliver land and property more equitably than the current government can do, because we're doing it already in the cities that we control. We're handing out title deeds on a massive scale to people who are occupying their houses, and we want to carry on doing that on an ever-expanding basis. We believe that every South African should own land, because that makes them free from the state, because then they can borrow against that land, they can sell the land if they want to, move into some other line of business. We think that it's absolutely fundamental to our view of property and the economy.
And what happens to the young DA leader, Mmusi Maimane, after his term of office is over?
Post my leadership tenure here in the DA, who knows, I might go start an NGO, I might go work in government to make sure that government does its work. What we mustn't do is make politics a retirement village, so that after politics you retire.
More with DA leader Mmusi Maimane right after the break. How did you feel about not being challenged for the position of DA leader, and what does it say about the state of the DA? Do you feel more emboldened?
Absolutely. One, I'm grateful that the delegates felt that they needed to give me an extended mandate, and I certainly look forward to leading the organization. I take it a great privilege to lead the DA.
You have adopted, Congress rather, has adopted the policy of diversity as a fourth pillar of the Democratic Alliance. How do I reconcile diversity when I look at the top 6 leadership that emerged out of this Congress? It doesn't really reinforce the idea of diversity.
No, I think it does, actually. Okay. I think that when you look at the leadership there, South Africans from all walks of life can see themselves there. There are black South Africans, there are colored South Africans, there are white South Africans, there are people who have a different sexual orientation. And I think diversity, you can never sit down and say, oh, well, here's the threshold. Diversity is a work in progress. Because otherwise tomorrow, say, to be sufficiently diverse, that means you have to say they needed to be so many of this and so many of that. And that's a very thing that we don't stand for. We've got to make it possible for anybody, for a black child to lead the DA, for a colored South African to be able to be a chairperson, for a white person to stand, because that is the party we're trying to build. Because if tomorrow we end up in a space where we say, look, only this race can stand because we have to fill that quota, then it can't work. That's why we reject quotas.
That's easier for me and you to understand, but is that going to be a tough sell to the constituency that will be voting in 2019? Is that going to be a tough sell to say this leadership group represents me and you fairly and is the best leadership group that can represent South Africa?
Absolutely, because you must never look at it in isolation. That same leadership group includes our mayors and people who have been tried and tested in government. And they can go out and look and say, oh, Solim Simanga is doing work here in Tshwane. But I want us to understand, it's a very important principle. I think at times we've been fed a lie that says only black people can speak for black people. Only white people can speak for white people. You do that, you will create a society upon which then we must say political parties must either be black or white, and that's how they do.
The issue of Patricia de Lille has been front and center, largely because of the very public spat between the mayor and the Democratic Alliance. And most people, even her, she just tweeted that that the Democratic Alliance is going to flout its own beliefs and constitution in order to go after her. How does that make you feel?
No, I think Patricia de Lille has run a public campaign. This is not about Patricia de Lille. It's about a constitution that says as we grow into more governments. When Patricia was in the DA, she was the only mayor of a big city. Now we have 4 mayors. As we grow, we might have more premiers. How do we hold them to account? Don't make the laws so that it can deal with an individual. Make the law so that you can deal with the future of the organization. And I think, what's wrong with the principle of accountability?
What's the cost of the impasse between Patricia de Lille and the DA looking into 2019? Surely it will cost you women who side with Patricia de Lille. Surely it will cost you young black women who consider her a hero. Surely it will cost you, it will cost you votes. Do you worry about that, how much it could cost?
If in tomorrow I said, look, that leader here has got a following there, they are above the party, they are above discipline, then they are not accountable. That's the first thing. The second thing is, I think we must be wary never to create an impression that gender solidarity and racial solidarity cuts across everything. So if I as a man do something right, I don't expect all the men to say, oh, we are with him. So that in tomorrow when I do something wrong, the same men say, no, we are still with you regardless because you're just a man. Surely we want to ask our young girls, our young females, colored South Africans, all people of this country to say, no, if someone does something that's not right and they lose the confidence of their caucus, which is not my doing, it's the caucus, then you must be willing to say it's not gender solidarity, it's the principle of saying she's lost confidence. So when we go into next year's election, the question that voters ought to ask us is that when you discovered there were problems, what did you do? Did you act? Did you hold the person accountable? And is anyone in the DA above the law? Because let me give you a parallel situation. There is a president whose party protected him through everything, all wrongdoings. Now, he's even in court for fraud and corruption and racketeering. And there are people that are saying, in the interest of solidarity, we are going to protect that. But surely, you don't want to build a political body that simply says, oh, well, if the person does this and we can test their popularity, don't deal with them. Because in future, laws, it must not be the rule of man or man's popularity. It must be the rule of law.
Your former alliance partner, the Economic Freedom Fighters, has nuanced the issue of race through its gung-ho view of why they should get rid of Athol Trollip, who in their voice and their words represents DA's arrogance and whiteness. How are you going to make sure that race is not a determining factor, seeing as how easy it is to get people entangled in the debate?
It's the story of Africa. When liberation movements or pseudo-liberation movements lose their way, they resort to race. They don't have an argument about how to improve people's lives. They simply just reduce it. In Nelson Mandela Bay, Athol Trollip has done an exceptional job at delivering services for our people. And he's turning that government around. So they're not removing him because of his performance in government. They're removing him because he's white, which is racism. But I tell you what, the people of this country will reject that. Because South Africans in their content are not racist. South Africans, all they want is an opportunity, like all of us. They understand that that's why they can come to the DA. Because they say, whether you're black, white, Indian or colored, I can work with you. Because the issue is not about the color of your skin. It's actually about we shared interest in advancing our own children's futures. I spoke yesterday about an African liberalism that says to be black is to be proud, but it's not to oppress or to be determined simply just by that value. There are much more to that, and therefore naturally I think our people will reject it. And as they did, there was a by-election in Nelson Mandela Bay which was an interesting test. In fact, spoiled ballots got more votes than the AFF. It's always a genuine reminder that be wary not to stoke up people's racial fears.
Fair enough. Mmusi, let's touch on the issue of property clause and juxtapose it with what is the biggest mantra right now, which is land expropriation without compensation, largely led namely by your former alliance partner, the EFF, and the African National Congress. You stand diametrically opposed to that as the DA. Who do you think will win the battle to remain in the consciousness of the voters? Who do you think comes through better for their position come 2019 elections?
Our people know stuff is not free. You can in the beginning promise them heaven and earth and say it's going to be all for free. They know it's not. And that's why people are not saying, oh, if we remove compensation, we'll have land. It's not. What we've got to say to people, and we're starting to win that argument, let's do it within the law. Let's do it within the Constitution. Because trust me, there are many South Africans who already own property who are black, who are saying, oh, I don't want to lose this land. There are many South Africans who are saying to themselves, okay, we agree we need land reform and land restitution. But like Kgalema Motlanthe, we agree it's not the Constitution that's the problem. It's corruption, incompetence, and a lack of funds. And I think our people, where I think there's a misnomer, is to say we don't support less land restitution. That could not be true. We support it. We want it to happen within the law. And I want black South Africans who are dispossessed of land to own land in their own right. Because when you own land in your own right, you can do with it what you want and determine for yourself where you're going to go. It's the rights of individuals, private property clause. And in the Section 25, it speaks about property. So today it's land. Believe you me, tomorrow it'll be something else.
My watch, perhaps. I want to finish off by looking at this. And this has been, for me, you know, because of who you are and how old you are a fairly young leader in this country, you know. In fact, you and Julius, I think, stand head and shoulders as probably the youngest leaders of political parties on the continent. Now, my question is, what happens to Mmusi Maimane once he is not DA leader? What is the political future of Mmusi Maimane?
I didn't join politics to be the leader of a party. I joined politics to fight for our people, to fight for the excluded. That's what I wake up every day to. I don't wake up every day going, let me go be the leader. No. I wake up every day asking this simple question. Our people who are poor, who's fighting for them? It's always been the defining feature. Whether I was in church, whether I was in politics, whether I was in business, we should always be conscious of the fact that our struggle is that freedom must never be exclusive. It must be for all. Otherwise, the very thing that undermines our freedom is poverty, my brother. So when people are poor, they are not enjoying freedom. That's a fact. So until that injustice is addressed, we've still got a lot of work to do.
I'm not sure if it explains what you do.
What I do after that is irrelevant because subsequent to that, post my leadership tenure here in the DA, who knows, I might go start an NGO, I might go work in government to make sure that government does its work. What we mustn't do is make politics a retirement village so that after politics you retire. No, or public office you retire. The same question can be asked for Macron, the president of France, Barack Obama, the president of the US. Man, we live in a continent where the average age is young, but we are led by older people in presidential offices. Surely we must advance the cause that says, no, let young people be given an opportunity to lead, because I think we can turn this thing around. Not to be ageist, but I think this is not a retirement home. More younger leaders will come through who will have to in future answer the question, what do I do after, maybe you might be an executive mayor, maybe a president. What do I do after being a former president? You can do whatever you like.
My parting question, those young people will make the majority of the constituency that will be able to vote come 2019. How does that leadership that I saw now, the new leadership that's been elected by Congress, deliver those young people to make sure they put an X next to the DA emblem and your face?
It's about making sure they go out in all communities. You know, it's about getting to where young people are at. It's about giving them something to believe in, something to follow. Our young people are smart. They don't just believe simply in just this person or that person. They want an ideal to fight for. They marched for free higher education, not because it was inspired by a political party, because it was an ideal. The question we've got to ask for them is, are you going to join us next year in fighting for those who are excluded? And I think young people are invited to that cause.
Well, that's it for Political Capital. It's been a pleasure being with you this week. That's it from us from here in Durban. But remember, we'll be back here on the 8th of June following Africa's trial of the century. Until next time, good evening.